Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluence Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the global sport landscape. Today, I'm excited to welcome founder of Groov, Dan Cataldi, on the show, revolutionizing a problem that was honestly sitting right in plain sight, things I would never think about, but it's not my story to tell. Dan, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me on, Scott. I'm doing well, man. It's Wednesday, middle of a solid week. I'm excited for this conversation, and I appreciate you having me on.
Man, likewise. And, it's always fun. We're going to timestamp this. We got game 4 of the New York Knicks. Dan is 5th generation in New York. And when you talk about pent up energy, if you're in and around the city, you know that it is buzzing. And Dan, it's really cool. We're going to dive in. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about Groov and how you're innovating from the soul up. And I'll sort of leave it at that. But, I think it's important, Dan, that we understand who you are before we dive into your amazing innovation around the footwear space. So give the listeners a little context of, from Brown and wrestling to where you're at now and everything in between.
Yeah, to try to make a long story short, which is rarely something I'm good at. As you mentioned, grew up in New York. I actually grew up in the house my mom grew up in, went to the high school she met my dad at. My dad was a swimmer turned wrestler. And I, found myself becoming increasingly serious about wrestling growing up. Wound up going to Brown for undergrad, where I was on the varsity wrestling team, and I also studied theoretical math and poetry, as most wrestlers do. So clearly I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up then. And, I like to still say that the privilege of being an entrepreneur is I'm still deciding what I'm going to do when I grow up now. But I know what I'm doing right now, which is a beautiful thing. And after Brown, moved to DC, worked on a team that jointly served as the chief of staff for the founder and CEO of a Fortune 100 company in the DMV area. Did that for a bit of time, eventually decided I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And like a man buying a safety net, I applied to business school, ended up deferring when COVID hit. Discovered surfing in that time, and that's become a passion of mine in adulthood. Gotta get beat up by something, and don't do that on the wrestling mats anymore. So now I ask the ocean to do it for me.
Yeah.
And wound up, going to Wharton to do my MBA. Started Groov while I was there, and didn't make it out the other side, but ended up putting a pause on school after 3 semesters with the investments of some of the deans and professors at the school and a, lot of momentum in the market, trying to do what it was that, we'd been pushing towards.
How cool, man. And I appreciate you painting a little color to it, right? It's always interesting to understand where the journey starts. And, it's Groov is your latest expression. And I'm really curious, how you landed here, so for everyone who's not familiar with Groov, let's start there. Give us a little high level overview of what you've built and what the journey's been like, coming out of Wharton and where you guys sit today.
Absolutely. So Groov is a footwear personalization system that bridges the gap between one surface fits all off the shelf footwear and the unique human anatomy of the person who's wearing those shoes, right? A third of the joints in the body are in the foot and ankle. Everyone's feet are remarkably different. And we've got this standard of putting everyone on the same surface, just changing the length to ensure that it doesn't fall off your foot. We still use 101-year-old technology to navigate that process. But everybody, who's ever shopped for shoes in a shoe store can recall that experience of getting a bunch of different pairs that are all technically your size and the same size, but you walk around in each one and you realize they all feel drastically different. Some feel fine, some feel terrible. Occasionally you'll find a pair that, feels phenomenal, like it somehow understands your body better than any of the others. But that difference really all comes down to the surface you're standing on in the shoe, when the length of the shoe is the same for all of them. But that's not something that you can have, optimized for the whole population at once, because everyone's foot shape, their anatomy, their dynamic mobility, range of motion, they're all different. So to get it right, you need to get it right at the individual level and personalize it for a person. It's why if you ever look at the folks who have got the greatest access to the cutting edge in the footwear game and have, for decades been at the vanguard of where consumer shoes are going are the NBA's biggest superstars. But anytime LeBron James gives away his shoes, he goes out of his way to hold on and not give away to the custom insoles that personalize his actual experience in the shoe. Here's Giannis Antetokounmpo doing the same at a home game and an away game. You'll see Anthony Davis here doing it. You see Jason Tatum doing it. If you watch Novak Djokovic giving away his shoes on a tennis court, you'd see him doing the same thing because the shoe is a shell that, holds that whole system together. But the interface between your foot and the ground is that surface you stand on. And so Groov enables anybody to get the optimal surface for their unique anatomy to stand on in any shoe.
It's really interesting. And quick aside, and then we're going to come back and go 3 layers deeper because I'm so intrigued. But I was just in Japan and I did some skiing over there. And it was really quite interesting when getting measured for ski boots. It was so much more advanced. You stood on this thing and measured your foot. It gave you all the right, criteria. And then all of a sudden, you had a boot that fits it. And I, as I was like preparing for this, I drew a ton of correlation there and just how antiquated the process was when I would go and show up at a shoe store to find a generic shoe. But Dan, you have bridged this into performance, right? And, doing some research, you were calling it the $5,000 tax, right? And so I'd love for you to break down what was the process of getting a custom insole and how you typically did it, and then how you've moved in with Groov and have taken over half of the Islanders and they're now using your product. Talk to us about the evolution of this custom insole that you have built here.
Yeah, so my father's sold orthotics my whole life. He doesn't wear orthotics anymore. He wears Groovs, but I was familiar with the space growing up. I wasn't interested in it at all. The posters on my wall had Dr. J, not Dr. Scholl's.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for insoles. I viewed myself as a high performance athlete, as a D1 college wrestler. And the one time I did allow him to make me a pair of orthotics, I didn't even like them. They didn't fit in my shoes. I had to cut them. When I did, they were still too bulky and I had to get a, bigger old man shoe. And then they didn't even feel good. You could historically get a custom insole through the orthotic process that at the very, very kind of low end of the quality and price range may have been $350. Generally, you're looking at $600 plus from the medical system. And that's, a kind of corrective medical device that is made in the sort of sterile, uncomfortable way that medical device product design has historically been done. But there was no real ceiling to how much it costs. A regular consumer going to a clinician could have been charged $1,000 a pair. If you were trying to get the optimization that, LeBron James is solving for, that, the sky's the limit on what that would cost. And the level of hand craftsmanship that would need to go into getting it made at the time. So what we've done with Groov is try to figure out 3 things. One, how do we make this process affordable? So, how do we get the price of this within the range of footwear purchasing prices, not, medical device prices? 2, how do we make it extremely accessible? So it's not an inconvenience. Perhaps it's even a cool little journey of trying a new process to get a pair of Groovs. And then 3, how do we make it desirable? How do we make this sexy, and not feel anything like, braces for your feet, but instead feel like Porsches for your feet?
Yeah.
And so the crux behind much of that, especially the second bar of accessibility, is our shape sense technology. So what this enables you to do is in seconds take a very high precision 3-dimensional scan of your feet using an iPhone. So the way it works for your foot, to catch the underside as you put your phone on the ground, you hold your foot above it. It detects the foot. It tells you if you need to reposition, and then it auto captures a high precision 3-dimensional scan. It uses infrared depth mapping built into the phone to power Face ID. And so I'll show you so that neither of us nor your audience has to look at my feet on this call. I'll show you me demoing it on my face. You can see the precision in the speed right here. And so just like that, we're capturing over 30,000 data points in 3 dimensions that we
Wow.
then feed into our surface optimization algorithm. That won the 2023 Wharton AI Award, and it determines the perfect surface for your feet to stand on in your shoes. And it enables us to put together and deliver a pair of grooves. The pair is going to show you your custom engraving before you even open the box. The VVV is what we put on Von Miller's pairs, and it'll emphasize the custom nature of it by even showing you a photo of the person the pair was made for once you do open the box.
How cool is this, man? So this is actually a really interesting inflection point. When I was thinking about this, are you an insole company? Are you a biomechanics company? Or are you completely creating a new category of customization? Where do you see yourself and what you've created with Groov?
Yeah, so I think we're a tech company that's revolutionizing the way that we wear our shoes. We use insoles. I think that what it is we're putting in shoes, whether it's the performance oriented response model, the recovery oriented everyday model, the, formal shoe oriented luxe model, the ski and snowboard carve model. We've got, as you mentioned before, hockey line, and that goes through our blade model.
Wow.
Those tools, those are insoles. They're fully custom. They're AI optimized to determine the perfect contour for the individual wearing them. But they're also just one component of our system. What Groov is ultimately coming at is the notion that this does good enough. It's the notion that if you know how many millimeters long your foot is at its max length, that's, enough to get you the best experience in footwear that you can get. And increasingly, when people are shopping online for shoes and not even getting that full try-on process, it's a hassle to return things. Some people will buy multiple sizes, multiple different models, planning on returning them, but it's still a big hassle. What we're doing is we're using several different tools to create a system that enables us to really change the way you interact with the shoe. Of course, I'm using an extreme analogy here anytime anyone compares themselves to Apple. But, I look at it as, the phone was one component of what they used to enable the experience of a smartphone. It also required the internet. It also required adding a keyboard to it, doing, certain things with the App Store that made for this modular, customizable experience. But so I view us as a company that provides custom insoles, as part of a broader service. And I think that over time, we have the ability to evolve into a company that not only provides the tool of the custom insole and the tool of the intake process, but also the tool of enabling really high quality and high precision guidance in the shoe shopping process more broadly.
No, I mean, we're going to touch on the data here in a second, but I mean, I imagine that's a really interesting component when you're able to go ahead and capture so many unique data points when we start thinking about like the commercial application of this with endemic shoe brands. But Dan, before we go there, I want to, touch on this. One of the things that we see from the athletic world is the professionalization of sports coming all the way downstream. You've done an amazing job of getting Groov on some of the most well-known athletes across the Big Four, from Von Miller to the Islanders to MLS players, etc. Walk me through, if I'm a young athlete, right? My foot is growing quite a bit. What are the advantages to having a custom insole? How are you educating the broader market on the advantages to this versus waiting until my foot is fully developed to go ahead and then go through this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have 8 out of 10 US adults reporting regular foot discomfort as something they put up with in life. And I think that many people assume that to be an inevitability, not something that's avoidable, but it really is if we, support our feet correctly, not just at that time, but in the lead up to it before issues really develop. Our feet, as you know, I'm sure, didn't evolve to wear shoes. We make that trade-off for good reason. We protect our feet with shoes, but then it also asks this dynamic appendage to stay in one position all day. And the best position to do that in for any foot is going to be different. But we're not able to bridge that gap right now. We're not able to solve that problem for individuals. And so we develop issues. Plantar fasciitis is extraordinarily common. A lot of people suffer with tremendous heel pain. But if a condition is solvable by wearing different shoes, by wearing different arch supports, it makes me wonder, is that a medical issue or is that just a footwear issue? And by getting folks proper foot support, before their foot adapts to being unsupported and yet at the same time locked up in this cage, it ultimately gives them that best path forward to enable their feet to remain healthy, to recover well. You still develop strength in your foot, both when you have the shoe off as well as when you have it, well supported to react in performance sports and stuff. But what it's doing is it's giving you that baseline position so that your arch structures don't end up collapsing on top of each other, recruiting in the small stabilizer muscles, fatiguing and leading to this vicious cycle of inflammation and discomfort. So we're, very bullish on the youth market, both youth sports and youth leisure. In terms of the education there, a big focus of ours has been getting the right partners in place. So as you mentioned, we're now working with athletes and teams in the NBA, the WNBA, the MLS, the NHL, the NFL, the SEC, the MLB, and more that aren't coming to mind right now. And, that enables us to project a lot of authority, not because we're saying it, but because folks know that the folks who are trusting us have the ability to check out everything that's out there and discern for themselves what's going to be the best and listen to their advisors and trainers who know what they're talking about. And to that same end, we're working with NYU Langone Foot and Ankle Surgery. We're working with the Hospital for Special Surgery. We're working with some of the top medical authorities and institutions in the world who are partnering with and backing us because they understand not just the efficacy of what we're doing, but the ability for it to shift the threshold from like this, this being custom support, being historically viewed as something that you're only going to get if you need it because you have like a severe problem, to now being able to provide that in a way where if you want it, and you should because it'll help you feel better, you can get it because it's accessible and affordable enough.
Which is so neat when you start to realize how antiquated the model was, and we lived in a reactionary, society. By the time you feel it, it's already too late. Dan, I gotta ask, you held up 5 different iterations of it, right? Sort of the lifestyle, the skiing, the athletic. What is the natural consumer behavior? When you get one, do you see people buy multiple pairs of grooves? Do they switch them across? How does that typically look in your world?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. There's a bifurcation. I might even say a trifurcation. We have folks who will buy one pair of grooves and they will be switching them between their shoes, like any shoe that's a regular or relatively standard shape. They'll be able to move it across all their pairs. Most folks who start wearing grooves, don't want to step back into a shoe that doesn't have a surface that supports their foot the way it should be supported. They don't want to step back onto something like this, just hiding, the structural kind of materials, like the construction, the loose threads and whatever you might find under something like this, because this is kind of just there to hide that. It doesn't do much for you beyond that. So when folks get grooves, they ultimately largely want to end up wearing them anytime they've got their feet in shoes. And so some folks are going to move it across pair to pair. Those folks seem to reorder at the 1 to 2 year mark, though you can get longer life out of a pair of grooves if you treat them kindly and don't use them too intensely. Then we've got folks who will get a pair, often the everyday model, to try first, love the experience, decide they're interested in getting our high performance model and our formal shoe model, and then they get one of each of those. Maybe they tack on, another pair of the everyday, but generally they've got, a small set that spans our different models so that by moving them around, they can cover all of their shoes, right? You're not going to be able to move the everyday model into your tuxedo shoe, or if you're a woman, into your ballet flat or pump. You can move it into most of your shoes, but you need to get the other models if you want coverage in all of your shoes. Then we have, the people who make my month, which are the folks who've got insane shoe collections and want a pair of grooves for every shoe and can afford to not put up with the hassle of having to move them between shoes. One of our customers last fall, it was probably around July, made an order for like 9 pairs of grooves. At the time, it was the largest order we'd seen come through. And about 3 weeks later, he put in another order for like 15 pairs. Wow. And then maybe a month after that, now we're deep into the fall, he put in an order for, over a dozen pairs again. And so my mind is racing. I'm thinking back to the Wharton professor turned investor in the business who, has his research focus in kind of identifying the super high value customers, trying to better understand them and figure out how to attract more of a similar profile. So I reached out to him to want to learn more, right? Who's this guy who has more pairs of grooves than I do? And we hopped on a call, and unshockingly, he is a big sneakerhead. He's also the part owner of a women's pro soccer team, a big golfer. He discovered us through the favorable write-up we got in My Golf Spy. They called us the footwear product of the year last year. And now he's Groov's largest individual angel investor.
Wow.
And that was a very cool experience of watching, a consumer or a customer become an advocate, become an investor and a backer.
And I think that's a great nugget for everyone listening. Dan, there's a lot of innovators that listen to the podcast. And sometimes, we spend so much energy going out and looking for investors, when if you're sending the right signal through the products, it's the early adopters that, are willing to go ahead and get behind the product more than just a customer, right? And, I think that sort of segues so nicely into where I want to go. You guys are building something very interesting, right? And like, we're going to talk about sort of nerding out on the data set, but I want to talk about the future of shoes, right? Where, we've sort of seen a stagnant model. Endemics continue to push out really, really large sets of these shoes, like you said, not very customized. Now we're watching the advancement and sort of the marriage of, deep AI to understand really intimate data points, and then 3D printing, where we're watching, shoes be printed on demand. I'm curious, as you look at sort of the evolution of Groov, will it always be insoles, or do you see sort of a transformation in footwear as a whole?
Yeah, I can envision when I allow myself to, look past what we've got to get done today and tomorrow. I can envision a world in which we fully embrace the reality that the shoe itself is a shell, and that, the shoe itself serves 2 real purposes. One is aesthetic. It's a fashion statement. Everyone sees the shoe you're wearing. And the other one is utilitarian. There are different considerations for how a shoe might perform, right? Do you want to put spikes on the bottom for tremendous traction? Do you want to have the shoe be a high top to give you more ankle support? I think that beyond that, the actual experience of how you feel in a shoe isn't driven by the laces. It's not driven by the material of the tongue. It's driven by the surface you're standing on. And so I envision a world in which, we build the shoe for the consumer around their custom surface. And so the shoe can be constructed modularly around that. If you're talking about a sandal, a heel, a slipper, perhaps you have a system where you just assemble 2 pieces around that footbed, so you don't even need to slide anything into it. But I think that we could get to a point, especially with the way I see Groov's early adopters, being so beholden to their custom insoles, where, we're selling shoes to folks who are already bought into the system that don't have something like this in there, but they're prepared to receive something fully custom for somebody. We started doing last-based shoe manufacturing in the 20th century. And oftentimes when we make things more accessible, they also become lower quality as, a kind of natural consequence of the trend towards making things more ubiquitous and figuring out more and more efficient ways of producing them. If you look at like the earliest pottery in ancient Mesopotamia, you actually see that it's more grandiose and nicer than what you get 1,000 years later once they develop the pottery wheel, because they just start busting them out. And then it takes another, 1,000, 2,000 years before they start bringing in that real artisanal craftsmanship into their quick replicable process. And it catches back up. And so in many ways, what we're getting manufactured on the other side of the world for a shelf at a Dick's store or something like that, may not actually match up to the quality of, a bespoke pair of shoes that somebody with money would have gotten 100 years ago. But now I think we're hitting that inflection point where we can do what we would want to do at the individual level, but we could do it at scale. And the reason for that is because of the tools we have today, right?
Yeah.
What used to require hand craftsmanship can now be replaced by big data intake, a well-trained algorithm, and quick processing power.
Which is so exciting, right? Like, I mean, it's there's a lot of rhetoric around the doom and gloom of the AI world that we are entering in, but I think that, episodes like this remind us of the real world application, which can enhance our life and have meaningful impact immediately from just having a more customized experience instead of a generic experience as we walk around this world. Dan, I've been doing this for almost 300 episodes with Andrew. Mesopotamia has never been brought up on a podcast, man. So for that, I do appreciate you. Look at as we wind this thing down, this is not just about getting to understand you and your journey, but it's also how do we help send the right signal to the folks within the sporting market, which then trickles out into society. Dan, walk us through, if we want to go ahead and get Groov Insoles, what's the process? How do we get going? This is your time to plug everything about Groov.
Yeah, no, it's super easy. You go to www.groov.me, Groov.me. On an iPhone is easiest. You're not going to need to download any apps. You just go to shop now at the top if you want to pick your model, or take our quiz if you want to, be given a recommendation. You pick your model, you add it to the cart, you check out. On your order confirmation screen, you see a button that comes up that says finish your scans. You click that, you follow the prompts. We've got video guidance, audio guidance, haptic feedback. It takes like 3 minutes and then you're done. Your grooves get to you within a week. And then, as we say, we don't make your shoes, we make shoes yours. Our goal is to make every single pair of shoes your most comfortable favorite pair. And, if you're not happy, you just let us know. We've got a satisfaction guarantee and we'll make it right. But, it's so cool, Scott, to be able to come on here and talk about this, talk about the benefits of Groov and improving comfort, optimizing performance, maximizing support and injury mitigation. The story of where this thing could be going, and even mixing in a little bit about me in there.
I mean, look at, man, behind every great invention, there's an inventor, right? And I think it's so important to understand the complement there and why you're building it. And again, like, there's a generational theme with you, Dan, right? Like, living in the same house where your parents were, a lineage of your father's traditional business, and then evolutionizing it as the tools become more accessible in our world, I think is just a really neat moment to understand why. And for all you listeners out there, I would be willing to bet that you don't know if you pronate or supinate. And maybe we start there just to understand how your gait is and what these, custom insoles can do for the quality of life, your performance. And don't wait until it hurts. Don't wait until you're thirsty. That means you're already dehydrated. And the same goes for your feet. Dan, listen, man, from the Profluence family, thank you for everything you're doing, from innovation to execution in and around the sports space. We look forward to following your journey. And you bet your ass that there's going to be a Groov in my shoe after this episode. Thank you again, my friend. We look forward to doing it again soon.
Hell yeah. I appreciate you very much, Scott.
Yes, sir.